France is the eldest daughter of Catholicism, and it was the first Catholic nation to apostatize the faith into pure atheism. I'll read a few quotes from Marian apparitions. These quotes are taken from my video macro analysis of Catholic prophecy. La Salette, the Marian miracle approved by the Vatican, says, "With the first lightning blow of his sword, the mountains and all nature will tremble with dread, because the disorders and crimes of men are piercing the vaults of heaven. Paris will be burned and Marseille will be swallowed up. A number of large cities will be shattered and swallowed by earthquakes. All will seem lost." A 13th century saint said, "Spoliation, pillaging, and devastation of that most famous city, which is the capital and mistress of France, will take place when the church and the world are grievously troubled. The Pope will change his residence and the church will not be defended for 25 months or more. During all that time there will be no pope in Rome, no emperor or ruler of France. But after this a young captive prince shall recover the crown of the lilies, and shall extend his dominion all over the world." Marie-Julie Jehenny, the 19th century stigmatic, stated, "When will the king and the pope make their appearance? It seems at the time when Paris burns," and later she is told by Mary that when Paris burns, fewer than 100 people will survive the city center. The 16th century Third Order Franciscan and mystic Nostradamus said, "In Avignon the head of the empire, the great king, shall make ready for Paris desolate." So we see that Paris is going to be brutally destroyed, first in a civil war, but why? To understand that, we have to look at France's past, namely the French Revolution, which was not a people's revolution, but the instantiation of atheism over Catholicism. In truth, it was a bloody tirade and revolution that ended in the massacre of Brittany and Vendee. France itself, the eldest daughter of the Catholic Church, was once an incredible kingdom led by king saints like King Louis IX and Louis XVI. They lived and died as faithful Catholics resigned to the will of God. They had an order of magnitude greater dignity than that of the French Revolutionary Central Committee or that of Napoleon. Now onto the French Revolution. Vendee and Brittany were critical in the counter-revolution in defense of traditional values, and Marie-Julie Jehenny highlights the immense valor of the martyrs who fought dramatically outnumbered for what was right. At first, Vendee supported the revolution due to promises of material improvement, but after the Civil Constitution's The Clergy Act was passed, Vendee stopped its support. The act destroyed many parish communities, centralizing control over parishes in the countryside of Vendee. It dissolved all male and female religious orders except for those providing charity. It rendered priests and bishops as diplomats and made it so that they were elected by non-Catholics. Pius VI was horrified at this sacrilegious notion, and he made multiple papal briefs forcing all priests and bishops not to sign off. From here, relations between Rome and Paris were essentially cut off, and the Catholics of France were on their own. The majority of priests and bishops rejected the law, and so began the bloody repression. In 1792, 3 bishops and 300 priests were killed in Paris, and many were killed elsewhere. 40,000 clergymen were exiled. In autumn, a concentration camp for priests was made, where nearly 1,000 were interned and over 500 died. John Paul II beatified 64 of those martyrs in 1995. Outraged by this attack on the church, the peasants of Brittany and Vendee created the Catholic Royal Army to push back against the repression of religion. The irony that the goal of the revolution was for liberty, equality, and fraternity, but liberty and equality are fundamentally opposed in the social order. To have equality, there cannot be liberty, and without liberty, there cannot be fraternity. As a result, the French Revolution was intellectually bankrupt from the start, and when the peasants, who the revolutionaries stated that they were fighting for, rejected them, the Central Committee in Paris decided to wage an all-out war in the name of liberty. In the western part of France, the Vendean resistance enraged Paris. The revolutionaries stated that it was in national interest to see the total destruction of Vendee. The National Convention approved a plan to deforest Vendee, burn down the houses, deport women and children and elderly, and to destroy the harvest and kill every man. While the revolutionary forces had an order to kill all resistance, the Vendeans fought with honor. When the dying general of Vendee heard that one of his brigades had captured 100 or so enemies, the general stated that "This is my last wish. Pardon all the prisoners and set them free. I do not want to stand before God after such a criminal act of killing prisoners of war." When the prisoners of war returned to Paris, the Central Committee heard their story and flew into a rage, censoring any man from speaking to the press, since this sort of moral aggrandizement clearly would reflect badly and humiliate the committee in Paris. General Turreau was given the job of exterminating Vendeans, and he made what he called 12 infernal columns, with the directive not to spare women, as they, quote, were the reproductive soil from which rebels arose. The Civil War ended with the Battle of Savigny, but the systematic extermination increased for another 18 months until finally Maximilien Robespierre was executed. Here's one of the quotes from a general on his work in Vendee. Citizens of the Republic, Vendee is no more. It fell along with its women and children under our free sabre. I have buried it under the mud of Savigny. Following orders, I crushed women in massacres, and at least they won't give birth to any more bandits. I have no prisoners of war. I exterminated them all. The road is littered with bodies. There are so many in some places that they're stacked like pyramids. In Savigny, we fired without stopping because bandits were constantly surrendering. We did not take prisoners, since then we would have had to grant them bread, and pity is not a revolutionary value. The women were raped. Some men had their genitals cut off. Pregnant women were crushed. As the extermination went on in western France, the guillotines were heavily at work in the rest of France. But all this wasn't enough. The guillotines and their blades were very expensive, and they could only kill about 75 people a day, so they started to force people to pay for their execution. They would pull their teeth and cut their hair for money. They experimented with barges, in which they would be stripped naked and hundreds of people would then be put on them and drowned. On some were hundreds of children. This was called the famous vertical deportation. In total, in Vendee, 120,000 out of 800,000 inhabitants died. A majority were women and children. Over 10,000 buildings were burned and destroyed. After the total collapse of the Revolutionary Central Committee and the failure of the pseudo-democratic state, Napoleon had a chance to rewrite history, to do justice and to right wrongs. Instead, he continued the anti-Catholic bent, warring against Italy, forcing the Pope to flee only to imprison him. Pope Pius VI, who died in his captivity. Then, later on, he captured and held hostage Pope Pius VII for 5 years. He forced the king to kiss the ring, coronated himself, destroyed the governance of Rome, and created a republic. Later, Napoleon whizzed around Europe, and he ended up killing 2 to 3 million people in all of his Napoleonic wars. So, instead of correcting the genocidal actions of the French Revolution, Napoleon doubled down and actually ended up adding millions more to the death count. Today in high schools, kids will be taught that the French Revolution was a glorious struggle for the people and by the people. In truth, France rapidly decayed and became atheistic. A new religion, atheism, arose. Over a 12-year span, Easter celebration went from 90% of France down to 50%. For a period of weeks to 3 years, depending on the proximity to the revolution, churches had to shut down as the priests were exiled and they feared for their lives. So now that you know what really happened in the French Revolution, we can start to address the current state of things. In the French Revolution, France terminated practice of the Catholic religion, which held it steady for more than 1,000 years. Meanwhile, it released its prisoners, and lawlessness and ethnic cleansing ensued. In World War I, atheism was still growing slowly, but then it took on the spirit of nationalism, only to later contort into racism and statism in World War II. But by this point, atheism had started to infect the whole of Europe, most critically Russia and Germany. Recently, in the past decade, France has imported millions of Muslims. In 2021, Macron tried to make it illegal for any French citizen to buy groceries without adhering to his vaccine policy. In 2024, Macron tried to get France into a war with Russia, saying that the French needed to step up and pay for Ukraine's security, to which the Russian minister advised Macron to think of what happened when Napoleon tried the same thing. In 2024, the far-right party won, and so Macron called a re-election and dissolved some of his party's seats in favor of the far-left Communist Party. Now, in 2024, we have the Paris Olympics, which was started off with a ridiculously sacrilegious ceremonial mockery of the Last Supper, followed by a pathetic apology to which Macron, the leader of France, publicly stated that this is France. In truth, the communists and Muslims in power in France hate the Catholic backbone of Western civilization. Thus, they are waiting for a sufficient level of chaos to be achieved to do what they really desire. They say they're sorry not because they think they've done something wrong. In fact, they're probably angered the same way the French revolutionaries were when they heard the news that the Vendeans spared their prisoners of war. Rather than true remorse, the half-witted apology after the overtly sacrilegious and approved ceremony suggests the powers of France are likely angered by the humiliation of having to apologize. But the powers need not fret. They will have their chance to do what they want, but first more chaos is needed, economic crisis and war. Indeed, one of the most prophesied events by the Catholic saints is a civil war in France, especially by Marie-Julie Jehenny. Although the powers will deliver the saints blows, the outcome of this civil war will be far different than the 18th century. Now regarding France, clearly as we saw in the beginning, Paris will suffer greatly, and we know that there will be civil war, and that foreigners will penetrate France's border. What do these mystics have to say? Let us keep in mind the war that happened between Vendee and Paris, and let us look at the stigmatic Marie-Julie Jehenny from Brittany, born in the late 19th century, about 100 years after the French Revolution. In a state of ecstasy, as if possessed by God, she states, France, who was previously so beautiful, has lost her honor. She will be invaded by heartless foreigners. They will destroy her holy temples. The French people will become miserable. All the doors have been opened wide to all languages, to the foreigners, to all those who wish to enter the cursed Sodom, Paris, where the justice of the divine Son sits suspended over it. And today, of course, we see Muslims constantly burning down the greatest Catholic churches. And even though Muslims were once France's adversaries in the Crusades, millions have taken up residence in Paris today. Julie says, speaking of the coming crisis, they all wanted disorder and revolution, they will have their fill. As if to say, the revolutionary spirit is not finished. Keep in mind in Garabandal, it said that the persecutions in Europe and France will not just harm Catholics because there are very few practicing today, but all those lukewarm and indifferent people will be racked with violence as they stood idly by. In Revelation 3 says, I know thy works, that thou art neither hot nor cold. I would rather that thou were cold or hot. Instead, because thou art lukewarm, and neither hot nor cold, I will spew thee out of my mouth. Julie says there will be a great denial of religion. For a time, Satan will be a master of all things. So according to the Breton stigmatist over 100 years ago, France will be overrun by Muslims and they will have their atheistic revolutionary spirit come back to finish the job. France will undergo a crisis. The blood of Christians will mingle with the blood of the just will fall in small numbers, but some will because the blood of the good will help the wicked. France will be divided up. There will be a ferocious civil war in France. The first uprising will be in the city of Paris and the government will collapse, and the city and its victims will die within its walls. Many times the flames of fire were shown to this criminal city, but this time it will be a hail of fire that will smother it. The Lord turns to the wicked, ungrateful city and said, Are you not built on a mountain of sins? Have you not spilled rivers of blood? In the past you gave me martyrs, today you populate hell. Yes, justice will visit you. The cries of alarm and despair rise up to heaven. The month of the Sacred Heart in my blood. It will be the signal of the punishment, the civil war. Then the government will see these changes. It will be like a bird, and it will fly to another country, and France will be free in its revolution. For a long time, the usurpers have hidden a fire half discovered under the walls of the city of Paris. As soon as a little bit of breath is put on these sparks, at once they will form burning infernos that will devour homes and kill many. Know well that these men, without faith, do not desire anything but disorder and death. Christians who do not hide prefer to water the earth with their blood, rather than pass through countries where peace reigns. In the center of Paris, fewer than 100 will survive. Here we see the fulfillment of the desired disorder by the atheist, which will come in the form of a civil war. At this time a crisis will ensue, in which there will be neither law nor order. Many souls will be possessed a few months before the crisis. The world will be mad with fear. In this madness, the devil who is everywhere on earth will make them deny their baptism. Later on, the Lord showed me the number of apostasies that will come during this fatal event. It will be the ministers of God who will be the first to begin. This punishment will open up the heavens, and God of vengeance will appear. Those who govern the church will give their lives and their strength to those who will establish a fatal government. They will close down the churches and surrender to disorders. All the works approved by the infallible church will cease to exist for a time. Here we see that the revolutionary spirit will momentarily achieve its end to suppress and silence religion, especially the Catholic religion, which is the backbone of Western civilization and is critical to France itself. During this crisis will come the great king in God's chastisement. She continues, half the population of France will be destroyed. After the chastisements there will be villages left without a soul. When everything seems lost, then will be the time of victory. Bede states, our principal doctors agree in announcing to us that towards the end of time, one of the descendants of the kings of France shall reign over all the Roman Empire, and that he shall be the greatest of French monarchs. A 16th century Italian saint says it best, the sixth period of the church will begin with the powerful monarch and a holy pontiff, as mentioned previously, and it will last until the revelation of the Antichrist. In this period, God will console his holy church for the affliction of the great tribulation which she has entered during the fifth period. All nations will become Catholic, vocations will be abundant as never before, and all men will seek only the kingdom of God and his justice. Men will live in peace, and this will be granted because the people will make peace with God. They will live under the protection of the great monarch and his successors. The powerful monarch, who will be sent by God, will uproot every republic. He will submit everything to his authority, and he will show great zeal for the true Catholic Church. The empire of the Mohammedans will be broken up, and this monarch will reign from east to west. All nations will come to worship in the true Catholic and Roman faith. There will be many saints and doctors of the church. Peace will reign over the whole earth because God will bind Satan for a number of years until the son of perdition.